Listen to me now, because what I'm about to tell you is going to sit with you for a very long time. I've been on this bench for over 30 years, and I've seen countless cases come through these doors. I've heard every excuse you can possibly imagine. I've heard lies wrapped up in pretty words, and I've heard truth delivered with tears. I've heard desperation, anger, confusion, and sometimes, just sometimes, genuine remorse. But what I'm looking at right now, what I'm reading in this file sitting in front of me, what I'm about to discuss with this young man standing before me, this one is different. This one is profoundly, fundamentally different. This one makes my blood run cold, not because I haven't seen depravity before, but because the depravity is so calculated, so deliberate, and frankly so utterly void of basic human decency that I need to sit here for a moment and remind myself that this person in front of me is somebody's child. He is somebody's son. And yet at the same time, I'm reminded that he did something so horrific that I'm struggling to reconcile those two facts. Let me read the charges into the record, because I want everyone listening to understand exactly what we're dealing with here. The defendant, a 23-year-old male, is charged with the kidnapping and assault of a 6-year-old child. Not just any assault. We're talking about aggravated sexual assault of a minor. The child was taken from a public playground on Elmwood Avenue on October 15th at approximately 3:45 in the afternoon. The abduction lasted 40 minutes. 40 minutes. Do you understand what that means? While parents were watching their children play, while people were walking by, while life was going on normally in this city, this individual, and I use that word loosely because I'm not sure what else to call him, this creature took a child and did things to that child that I can barely stomach reading about in a police report, let alone having to pronounce a sentence about. Things that no 6-year-old should ever have to experience. Things that would make most decent human beings feel physically ill. Unspeakable things. Now, before we go any further, I want to make something absolutely clear. I've spent my entire career trying to find the humanity in people who come before me. I've tried to understand the circumstances. I've tried to consider the backgrounds, the struggles, the traumas that sometimes lead people to make terrible decisions. That's been my philosophy. When someone comes to my courtroom, I listen. I really listen. I try to find out what's really going on with them. Because here's what I've learned over 3 decades. Most people who make mistakes have reasons. Those reasons don't excuse them, but they explain them. And understanding the explanation can sometimes lead to rehabilitation. Sometimes it can lead to mercy. Sometimes it can lead to redemption. But I need you to understand something, and I need everyone in this courtroom to hear this very clearly. There are lines in this world that when you cross them, when you deliberately, knowingly, and with full intention you cross them, that line separates you from the possibility of my compassion. That line demarcates something fundamental about human nature and human morality, and this defendant has crossed that line. Look at him. Take a good look. This is a young man. He's got his whole life ahead of him. Under different circumstances, different choices, different decisions, different thoughts. This could have been someone's success story. This could have been someone who contributed something positive to society. This could have been someone's doctor, teacher, engineer, artist. This could have been someone who made people's lives better. But instead, this is someone who made a choice, not an impulse, not a moment of weakness, not a crime of passion or desperation. This was calculated. According to the evidence, this individual had been watching this playground for 3 weeks. 3 weeks. He knew the routines. He knew when the supervision was lightest. He knew the exits. He knew the patterns. He spent 21 days planning this crime. 21 days thinking about how he would abduct a child. 21 days imagining. 21 days fantasizing about what he would do. He had a meticulous plan. He executed that plan with precision and deliberation. And when he executed that plan, he destroyed a child, he destroyed a family, he destroyed any sense of safety that community had. He obliterated the innocence of not just one child, but everyone who knew that child. The child, according to the victim impact statement, is now unable to sleep without nightmares. The child wakes up screaming in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, terrified. The child has regressed developmentally in ways that specialists say may take years to reverse, if it's even possible to fully reverse. The child has shown signs of severe trauma that doctors are saying will require intensive therapy to even begin to address. This child now has trust issues that will likely affect this child's relationships for the rest of his life. The child has difficulty concentrating, difficulty learning, difficulty functioning in basic ways. Teachers report that the child can no longer focus in the classroom. The child sits there unable to participate, unable to engage. This child's future has been permanently altered by what this defendant did. The parents, they're sitting right over there, and I don't need to describe what this has done to them because it's written all over their faces. They're broken. Their innocence is broken. Their sense of security is broken. Their trust in the world is broken. Their belief in their ability to protect their child is broken. They question every decision they made that day. They wonder if there's something they could have done differently. They live with guilt that is not theirs to bear. And the defendant, when he was arrested, when he was brought in by police, do you know what he said? He asked if he could have a lawyer. That's what he said. He didn't ask about the child. He didn't express remorse. He didn't break down. He didn't show any sign of empathy or understanding. He asked for a lawyer. That was his first instinct, to protect himself, not to ask about the welfare of the child he victimized. I've sat on this bench long enough to know that there are people who do terrible things and then they change. There are people who commit crimes and then they spend the rest of their lives making amends, understanding the gravity of what they've done, and becoming productive members of society. I've given second chances. I've believed in rehabilitation. I've seen it work. I've witnessed transformations that would make you believe in the fundamental goodness of humanity. I've seen people who committed crimes come back years later and tell me they're sorry, that they've changed, that they've made something of themselves. That's beautiful. That's what the system should be about. That's redemption. But rehabilitation requires something fundamental. It requires remorse. It requires acknowledgement of wrongdoing. It requires a desire to change. It requires understanding that what you did was wrong. And looking into the eyes of this defendant right now, I see nothing. I see a void. I see someone who is more concerned with his own circumstances than with the permanent damage he's inflicted on an innocent child. Let me talk about something that's been weighing on my mind as I've prepared for this hearing. In my career, I've always tried to treat people with dignity. I've always tried to give them the benefit of the doubt. I've tried to see them as human beings first and criminals second. But here's the thing about compassion that people sometimes misunderstand. Compassion is not weakness. Compassion is not the absence of accountability. Compassion is not a substitute for justice. Compassion is understanding human complexity while still maintaining firm boundaries about what is acceptable in a civilized society. And what this individual did, what he did to that child, that is not acceptable. That is not a mistake. That is not a lapse in judgment. That is not a moment of poor decision-making. That is not something that can be excused or minimized. That is evil, plain and simple. The prosecution has presented evidence that is airtight. We have DNA evidence from the child's body. We have eyewitness accounts from at least 3 separate witnesses who saw him with the child. We have security footage from 2 nearby businesses that clearly shows him leading the child away from the playground. We have his own confession to police, which the defense is now trying to say was coerced. Coerced. This young man sits in an interrogation room and admits to authorities exactly what he did, step by step, detail by detail, and now his attorney wants to tell me that he was coerced. I've done this long enough to know what a forced confession looks like, and this isn't it. This is a young man who thought he could get away with something, got caught, and is now trying to wiggle out of the consequences. The evidence is overwhelming. There is no ambiguity here. There is no doubt. But let me address something that I think is important here because I want everyone listening to this to understand my reasoning. I've read the pre-sentence investigation report. I know his background. His parents divorced when he was 8. His father was absent, out of the picture entirely. His mother worked multiple jobs and struggled to keep the family afloat. He was bullied in school. He had some social difficulties. He spent a lot of time online, and according to the report, he was exposed to disturbing content at a young age. These are the factors that some people want me to consider as mitigating circumstances. These are the factors that the defense wants me to use as a reason to be lenient. These are the excuses that have been presented to me. And here's my response to that. I understand that his childhood was difficult. I understand that he didn't have everything he needed. I understand that he was influenced by negative factors. I get it. I really do. But you know what? There are millions of people who have had similar childhoods. There are millions of people who have been bullied, whose parents were absent, who have been exposed to disturbing content online. There are millions of people living in poverty, in broken homes, in dysfunctional families. Do you know what most of those millions of people do not do? They do not kidnap children and assault them. They do not cross that line. They do not commit these acts. Because there is something inside the vast majority of human beings, and I've come to believe that this defendant lacks it. There is something inside called a conscience. There is something called basic morality. There is something called the ability to distinguish right from wrong, and more importantly, the strength to do what's right even when circumstances are difficult. I was watching a video recently, and a mother was talking about how she taught her children about boundaries and consent and safety. She was explaining how even very young children can understand the concept that other people's bodies belong to other people. that you don't touch other people without permission, that other people have the right to feel safe and secure in their own bodies, that causing harm to others is wrong, that respecting other people's autonomy is fundamental to living in society, that your desires and your wants do not supersede another person's right to safety. This is fundamental. This is kindergarten-level morality. This is basic human decency. And this defendant, at 23 years old, either never learned this or worse, he learned it and chose to ignore it because he believed his desires were more important than another human being's safety and dignity. The victim's impact statement, which I have read multiple times, broke my heart. The mother describes finding her child after the assault, traumatized beyond comprehension. She describes how the child didn't want to be touched, how the child was terrified of men, how the child now has panic attacks at the sound of loud noises. She describes the enormous medical and psychological bills, the time she's had to take off work, the way her other children have been affected by the trauma in their home. She describes not being able to let her children play outside anymore, looking over her shoulder constantly, living in a state of fear and grief that should never have to be experienced by any parent in a civilized society. She describes the anger, the guilt, the helplessness she feels. She describes questioning every parenting decision she made. She describes the nightmares she has now. She describes feeling violated herself, even though she was not the direct victim. The defendant's mother, she wrote a letter. I read that too. She expresses shock and disbelief. She says her son never showed any signs of this kind of behavior. She asks me for mercy, for understanding, for compassion. She says he's a good person who made a terrible mistake. And I want to tell her something, looking at her right now in this courtroom. Ma'am, I understand that you're in pain. I understand that your son's actions have consequences for you as well, and that must be devastating. Your life has changed forever. Your future has changed forever. The shame and the knowledge of what your son did will be something you carry for the rest of your life. I get it, but I need you to understand something. Your son did not make a terrible mistake. People make terrible mistakes when they're doing something they thought was acceptable. People make terrible mistakes when circumstances overwhelm them. People make terrible mistakes in split-second decisions. Your son made a deliberate choice to commit a heinous crime. He spent 3 weeks planning it. He spent 3 weeks thinking about what he was going to do. He spent 3 weeks imagining the details. There is a difference between a mistake and a deliberate crime. And as much as I sympathize with your suffering, I cannot allow my sympathy for you to diminish the justice that is owed to that child and that family. Let me tell you something about the nature of crimes against children. I've studied the research. I've read the psychological profiles. I've consulted with experts in the field. And what I've learned is that child sexual abuse is rarely impulsive. It's rarely a one-time occurrence. It's rarely something that happens in the heat of the moment without planning. It's part of a pattern of behavior that develops over time, that escalates over time, and that, if left unchecked, leads to more and more serious offenses. These individuals don't just commit one crime and stop. That's not how it works. The research shows that without intervention, without consequences, without genuine rehabilitation, offenders like this will reoffend. They will harm other children. We have the opportunity right now in this moment to ensure that this individual does not have the opportunity to harm another child. We have the obligation to ensure that. Because I can tell you with absolute certainty that this defendant, this individual, this predator is a danger to the community. I'm sitting here thinking about something my father told me many years ago when I was just starting my legal career. He said, Frank, being a judge isn't really about the law. It's about the person in front of you. It's about understanding who they are and what circumstances led them to this moment. And he was right. That philosophy has guided me for over 30 years. But he also said something else. He said, but Frank, there are lines. There are lines that, when people cross them, your job is to protect the community, not to rehabilitate the person. There are crimes so serious, so heinous, that your primary obligation is to the victims and to the community, not to the perpetrator. And I'm standing at that line right now. This defendant has shown no remorse. He has shown no understanding of what he's done. He has shown no desire to change. He has minimized his actions in conversations with mental health professionals. He has blamed the victim. He has blamed his circumstances. He has blamed the website he was viewing. He has blamed everything except himself. He has tried to create reasonable doubt in a case where there is no reasonable doubt. And when given the opportunity to speak today, to address this court, to say anything at all that might demonstrate that he understands the gravity of his actions, he sat there silently. His attorney advised him to remain silent, so he did. Do you know what that tells me? It tells me that he cares more about protecting himself than he cares about the child he harmed. It tells me that he is willing to avoid responsibility at any cost. It tells me that he has not internalized the concept that other people matter. It tells me that he views other human beings, particularly children, as objects to be used for his own gratification rather than as human beings deserving of respect and protection, it tells me that he is a threat to this community. I'm going to sit here for a moment because I need to explain something about my philosophy of sentencing. I believe in proportionality. I believe that the punishment should fit the crime. I believe that sentences should be designed to protect the community, to punish the offender, and yes, when possible, to rehabilitate. But protection comes first. Let me say that again. Protection comes first. The community's safety, the potential victim's safety, that comes before rehabilitation. That comes before my desire to find the humanity in someone. Because I have a responsibility to everyone who walks on the streets of this city, and especially to children who cannot protect themselves. The crime charged here carries a mandatory minimum sentence of 15 years. 15 years. That means this defendant will spend at least the next 15 years of his life behind bars. The maximum sentence is 20 years. 20 years. And I want to be very clear about why these sentences exist. They exist because society has determined that crimes against children, sexual crimes against children, require significant incapacitation. They require the removal of the perpetrator from society for an extended period of time. And I agree with that determination. These sentences exist to protect children. These sentences exist to protect families. These sentences exist to protect communities. These sentences exist because we, as a society, have decided that some acts are so incompatible with living among us that the perpetrator must be removed for a substantial period. As I sit here thinking about what sentence to impose, I'm thinking about that child. I'm thinking about what that child will be doing in 15 years. That child will be 21 years old. That child by that time will hopefully be well on the road to recovery, or at least in the process of healing. That child will hopefully have a chance at some semblance of normalcy. That child will hopefully have worked through some of the trauma with professional help. And maybe, just maybe, that child will be able to sleep through the night without nightmares. That's what I'm hoping for. That's what I'm thinking about when I consider the appropriate sentence. I'm also thinking about potential future victims. I'm thinking about the fact that if this individual is released into society before he's been thoroughly evaluated and found to have undergone genuine rehabilitation, and I'm talking about decades of therapy and intervention, he poses a significant risk of reoffense. The research is clear on this. Predatory behavior, especially sexual predatory behavior, is not something that changes easily. It's not something that changes in a few years. It's something that requires intensive long-term intervention, and even then, the recidivism rates are concerning. Even after years of therapy, even after prison time, the risk remains significant. So protection has to be the priority, and it has to remain the priority. Now, I want to address something that I know some people are thinking. They're thinking, well, Judge, you always talk about compassion. You always talk about seeing the person in front of you. You always talk about understanding circumstances. Why are you being so harsh on this defendant? Why are you denying him the compassion that you show to other people in your courtroom? And my answer to that is because compassion without wisdom is cruelty. Compassion toward a predator without protecting his potential victims is a betrayal of my responsibility to the community. Compassion toward someone who has shown no remorse is enabling. Compassion toward a child sexual abuser is a form of abandonment toward every child in this city who might become his next victim. My compassion has limits, and those limits exist exactly where the rights of innocent children are at stake. Let me tell you about the other cases I've heard today. I had a woman come in this morning who had accumulated parking tickets over 3 years. She's a single mother of 2. She lost her job 6 months ago and has been struggling to find work. The tickets are adding up and she's drowning in debt. She came into my courtroom terrified. She thought she might go to jail. She thought her children might be taken from her. I looked at her circumstances and I reduced her fines significantly. I connected her with job training programs. She left my courtroom with hope. She left my courtroom with a second chance. That's compassion. That's mercy, because that woman has the capacity to change her circumstances. That woman has not deliberately harmed anyone. That woman deserves support and opportunity. I had a young man come before me who was speeding. He had an appointment he was late to. His pregnant wife was having complications and he was rushing to the hospital. He was speeding because he was trying to save his child's life. He was breaking the law, yes, but he was doing it for a comprehensible, even admirable reason. I dismissed his case. That's compassion. That's understanding the context. Because in that context, his actions, while technically illegal, were motivated by something comprehensible. They were motivated by love, by fear, by the desire to protect someone he loves. These are the cases where compassion belongs, where it makes sense, where it serves justice. But this defendant took a child. He planned it. He executed it. He did it for no reason other than his own sexual gratification. He did it knowing it was wrong. He did it knowing it would cause harm. He did it anyway. And you know what that tells me? That tells me that he is operating from a completely different moral framework than the rest of us. That tells me that his desires matter more to him than another human being's bodily autonomy. That tells me that he is fundamentally incompatible with living in a society that values the safety and dignity of others, especially children. I'm going to impose the maximum sentence available to me. I'm going to impose 20 years in federal prison. I'm going to impose that sentence because I believe it's proportional to the crime. I'm going to impose it because I believe it's necessary to protect this community. I'm going to impose it because research on offenders like this suggests that meaningful rehabilitation is a long-term process, and the public needs to be protected while that process, if it occurs at all, takes place. I'm imposing this sentence because I have a responsibility to the community, and that responsibility supersedes my desire to be compassionate to this particular defendant. But I want to say something directly to this defendant, and I want him to hear me. I want everyone listening to hear me. This sentence is not the end of your story. This is a period, a very long period. But while you're in prison, you have an opportunity. You have an opportunity to think about what you've done. You have an opportunity to participate in rehabilitation programs. You have an opportunity to develop something that, frankly, I'm not sure you have: empathy. You have an opportunity to understand at a deep level the harm you caused, not just to the child, but to that child's family, to that community, to the sense of safety that children should feel in their neighborhoods. If you ever get out of prison, if you ever re-enter society, which I hope will only happen after extensive evaluation and rehabilitation, my hope, and I mean this with absolute seriousness, my hope is that you will live with the knowledge of what you've done every single day of your remaining life. My hope is that you will never forget that child. My hope is that somewhere inside you, if there is any humanity left, you will feel remorse so profound that it changes you at your core. Because if you don't, if you leave prison and you're still the same predatory, remorseless individual who came before me today, then I fear for every child you might encounter. To the child, to the family, I want to say this: I'm sorry. I'm sorry that this happened to you. I'm sorry that there are people in this world capable of such cruelty. I'm sorry that you have to live with the trauma of what was done to you, but I want you to know that this court sees you, this court believes you, this court has listened to every word of your testimony, and this court has done everything within its power to ensure that the person who harmed you is removed from society and cannot harm other children. Your resilience matters, your recovery matters, your life matters, and I want you to know that the community is with you. We believe in you, we support you. This case is a reminder of something that's very important. It's a reminder that the law exists not just to punish the guilty, but to protect the innocent. It's a reminder that justice is not just about retribution. It's about community safety. It's about ensuring that the most vulnerable members of our society, children, have the protection they need and deserve. It's a reminder that there are lines that cannot be crossed without serious consequences. When someone deliberately harms a child, when someone does what this defendant did, they have surrendered their claim to compassion. They have surrendered their claim to second chances. They have sacrificed their place in the community. I'm imposing this sentence with a clear conscience and with the absolute conviction that this is the right decision, not because I'm a harsh judge, not because I don't believe in rehabilitation, but because I understand that my primary responsibility is to protect this community, especially its children. That comes before everything else. That comes before my desire to see the best in people. That comes before my philosophy of compassion, because compassion without boundaries becomes enabling, and I will not enable harm to children. I will not be part of a system that shows mercy to those who show no mercy to the most vulnerable among us. This court is adjourned.